Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you come back for the next episode covering the points of this conversation.
And follow the podcast on social media by finding @Prestigious_Pod.
Follow me, Mr. Kent, at Mr. Chris R. Kent.
Follow me, Chris Bean, at Chris Bean Official.
Join our Discord for exclusive content and personal interactions.
And if you'd like to be coached on how to live a more prestigious life, you can reach out to me, Chris Bean, on one of my social media platforms, or by emailing the podcast directly at prestigiousInitiative@gmail.com.
Lastly, sign up for our newsletter either through social media or on our website.
This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Bean, and here with me is Chris Kent. Hello, Mr. Kent.
Hello, sir.
Today we have an incredible guest joining us, Christopher Hensley, with over 2 decades of experience in the financial service realm. He's a specialist in retirement planning and pension coordination. Welcome, Chris.
Chris, thank you for having me on this show. I'm glad to be here. I'm picturing that Spider-Man meme with the 3 spiders. Well, it'll be easy to remember the names here.
That's right. So, Chris, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you here with us today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wear a couple different hats. My for-profit gig is I'm a financial advisor for Houston First Financial Advisors. That's my own financial planning practice. I've been doing that for about 20 years. I'm also a podcaster as well. So I've been doing my own podcast show, Money Matters Podcast, for the last 10 years. And I've kind of switched it up from being the host to being a guest on podcasts to celebrate my 10-year, my decade of podcasting here. So I'm kind of on a mini tour celebrating the 10 years of being on the air.
Well, congratulations for being in the podcasting game for 10 years. That's a feat that not many people can say that they've achieved.
Thank you. I love it. And, we were talking a little bit before the show started just about how the podcasting has changed. So, going from just the audio MP3, I was around at the beginning with iTunes, and when Tim Ferriss just started his show and Joe Rogan wasn't a thing yet, to now, fast forward to now, and we're doing video, and YouTube gets more traffic than Google when it comes to looking for podcasts. So, yeah, it's a fascinating, exciting time to be here for podcasting. For sure.
Yeah. Now, as somebody who is deeply involved in both the financial and emotional aspect of retirement planning, what key strategies do you find to be most efficient for individuals approaching this significant life transition?
Yeah, so as somebody who specializes in working with people 55 and up who are about 5 to 10 years away from retirement, a lot of different things that I can see my clients, being in the industry for about 20 years, I've had the privilege of working with people from the beginning of that process all the way to the other end, where all we're doing is living off of income distributions. So I've also got privy to mistakes that people have made along the way, right? So, the biggest thing that I would recommend to people is just the idea of savings, right? Now, that's not sexy. Nobody likes to hear that. It's not, this is not some big thing that I'm telling you that you don't know that you should be doing, right? But the idea of having 3 to 6 months of committed living expenses set aside in a cash cushion or a safety net is a huge, huge thing for people who are able to make it to the other side to retirement, right? That if you ask me what, the one trait that I've seen with the most successful people who've been able to retire and be, financially independent, able to turn their paycheck off, it's that ability to save, right? They may not be great investors. They may not have a sophisticated strategy when it comes to the stock market, but they have just this consistent behavior of putting money away, just kind of like you're exercising and you're building a muscle. They do this consistently with intention. And that is the foundation of the groundwork for being able to get to retirement. A lot of other things pop into my mind, but that's the real foundation of the first one I would start with for sure.
So we're talking about retirement here. Social Security comes to mind. Is Social Security something that is still happening? And, is that going to be something that's going to be around when I go to retire?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chris, how old are you?
35.
Okay, sorry, I'm one of the few people who can get away with just asking your age, right? Completely relevant, and I do this all the time. So you're asking the right question for somebody who's 35, right? The people that I work with who are 55 and up, when it comes to Social Security, I can pretty confidently say that if you go to the Social Security's website, there's a one-page explanation as far as when the trust accounts will run out. And the trust account for disability will run out way before the retirement benefit trust, right? So I think in general, advisors aren't great for speculating. We don't like to speculate about anything, but I can tell you I'm pretty confident that those people are okay. Now, for somebody who's 35, you're asking the right question. I suspect that what will be there for Social Security will be an entirely different animal altogether. One of the things that we're seeing with legislation is there have been many ideas floated out there about changing the retirement age and extending it out longer. Right. Because we know Social Security kicks on at 65, 66, 67 currently, but since life expectancy is going up, there have been Social Security reform put out there, bubbled out there, right, that they will move the age out on when you can claim Social Security. So what that really is, it's kind of a stealth way of totally revamping Social Security altogether and making us push a little bit longer, right? So it is a way for them to kind of do that. But again, I speculate that it will be there. It'll be a different animal, something that doesn't necessarily look like we currently have. But the idea of Social Security going away altogether, I don't think that's very realistic. I think that's if they take Social Security away completely, there would be people running down the streets, hair on fire. We're looking at the sky is falling type situation there. So but keeping up to date with what's going on with Social Security is a huge piece of retirement. A lot of people take that as, they're very interested in their investments and their 401k, and but the Social Security I say it's the stepchild of financial planning. It kind of takes the back seat, and it's super duper important because when you look at turning on your Social Security from, let's say, 65 until whatever your life expectancy is, 20, 30 years out in the future, that could be the biggest bucket of income that you have coming in. And often it far exceeds what people are able to save in their retirement savings as they work throughout their peak earning years, right? So really crucial part of your retirement planning is taking a conscious effort in looking at what's the best and most efficient way to turn on Social Security, not just for the retirement benefit, but also for the survivor benefit, right? If you're married and you pass away, a lot of times people just look at that Social Security as, hey, I'm ready to turn it on and retire. But if you're married and we're coordinating for a couple, be the best thing because you want to make sure you want the best of both worlds. You want the biggest survivor benefit if you were to pass away for your spouse, but you also want the biggest retirement benefit. So there's kind of a sweet spot that we look for there.
Yeah. I guess I hadn't taken all of that into context, but there's definitely a little bit more to that than what I naively thought.
It's a lot. It's complicated. A lot of times people look at Social Security and they think, oh, well, I'll be able to figure this out. But CPAs, attorneys, they've made some of these mistakes in Social Security that last throughout the rest of your lifetime, right? Same thing with Medicare. People think, oh, that's easy. It's actually I've been doing this for years. It's one of the most complex things. Think of it like the tax laws, right? They have thousands of tax laws out there and they change every single year. Social Security at this point is a moving target. There's things that they're changing up. Those rules can work against you if you're not aware of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, okay, so we're talking about retirement and having other sources besides just Social Security as that one. You're talking about saving as the premier way. When, and maybe there isn't, but when would be a good time for somebody to start? And is there a time that's too early to start saving for retirement?
Okay, so this is a great question. So there's never a time that's too early, or too late to get started, right? When it comes to saving for retirement. The magic of compound interest, we all know how that works, as if because it works against us when it comes to credit cards, right? But it works for us when we're talking about savings, right? So the longer time that we have to let money go out there and cook through the ups and downs of the market and the stock market, right? Or even just your savings account, right? Just the idea that the money has to cook for a long time to get those compound interest rates. That's a positive thing. And the more time that you have, maybe not obviously, the more time you have, it's working a lot less the younger you are. It just takes less, right? You can put the same $200 into your 401k on a monthly basis, but if you start that out at 50, that number doubles, it triples. You have to be very aggressive if you wait till later in life. With that being said, that is not permission to just give up, right? So some people look at it in their 50s and they're like, okay, man, I didn't do this. I didn't do a good job at this. And I'm just not I'm going to kind of put my head in the sand, kind of like an ostrich, right? And just ignore it. There are things like the catch-up contribution where you can get really aggressive after 50 and put a lot more into those retirement accounts and really bulk up towards the end, because you're literally having to kind of play catch up, right? But going back to Social Security, the average Social Security for a male is about $27,000 a year. For a female, it's about $24,000 a year, right? Because they've got longer life expectancy. So that's how the numbers work out. Giving you that Social Security number there, if you don't have any other retirement savings, whatever your annual income is, I'm assuming it's higher than that, right? So the idea that Social Security is going to be a full replacement for your income, it was never meant to be that. So what it does is it points the mirror right back at us, right? We have to take the responsibility to put money aside to save for our own retirement, or else we have a problem when we get out later in life. For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of later in life, the psychological impact of transitioning from full-time career to retirement, I'm sure is tough to manage. And I'm wondering, can you share some light on individuals who have navigated this transition successfully?
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing, right? The idea of the psychological and the emotional impact of retiring. You can almost take the dollar signs and the numbers part of it and just kind of put it aside, right? And just think about the transition of going from your social network being your job often, right? I see this a lot with men. This is a generalization. We're not supposed to do that. But often men have this kind of tough guy attitude that like, oh, I don't, I'm fine. But the reality is that they have a very rich and big social network that is just kind of embedded in their coworkers, right? And so when they transition to not being at work and they're at home, if they did not take the time to, build relationships with family or friends or have hobbies or things that they're passionate about, there's almost this sense of mourning that they're having to deal with this new abrupt kind of transition to their life. So that is a really big piece of it, is kind of acting as a guide to let people know, hey, this is a thing, right? And getting people into having them envision what are you going to do after that time, after you're no longer at work. Now, there are different personality types. Some people have no problem with it. They're like, I love gardening, and I'm going to garden as soon as I turn off the paycheck and start retirement. I'm going to garden full time, right? But then there are other people, and often some of the most successful people I work with, those are the hardest ones, right? The CEOs, the C-suite types. That I'm kind of that way. It's hard to, you got to get me by the shoulders and sit me down. Right? If you ask those types of people, when do you think you're going to retire? A lot of times they have a very difficult time coming up with that. They're like, well, I'll retire when my body stops me from going, right? So you have to kind of, give them a realistic idea of what that might look like. Often, unfortunately, people who give me that answer as their retirement, one of the most common reasons that people retire is that their spouse gets sick, right? So you may be strongly driven and not wanting to retire, but your spouse gets sick. You take off time from work to assist and help, and then you just never go back, right? Mobility has a lot to do with that as well. So that's a different topic, but equally as important when we're making some of these decisions for sure.
Right. Well, trying to think through this from the psychological component, we from early on, like 3, 4 years old, we go to school all day. We're off on the weekends, and then you go to college. You do that during the week, and then you're off on the weekends, and you could transfer into the workforce. You do that, from 3 years old, 4 years old, all the way through, you are doing something every day, every weekday during this bulk work time, and transferring out of that is a whole new thing, because your entire life you've been doing this, whatever it is, something through that 9 to 5 type of work, trying to figure out what to do outside of that. If you don't have a good connection with your family, or you don't have any hobbies, or plan to take up some hobbies or something, I can imagine you talked about like a sense of mourning. I wouldn't have thought about that like that before, but absolutely, that would be a very difficult transition to make.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about just the idea of the the lazy boy recliner. That's death, right? You've got people who are just who get to a certain age, and they're, I hate to say it this way, but just waiting to die, right? That is the opposite of how you want to be. That is the opposite of how you want to enter your retirement. So you're very astute and correct in the idea that we've got structured days and things that we're doing from beginning to end, right? And so really, it's part of that is allowing yourself the permission to turn on retirement, right? A lot of times you've been saving for this, you've got this big bucket of money that's there. And even when it's time to retire, I'll have people that they're like, oh, should I take money out of the non-qualified assets or the retirement accounts, right? Because they're so used to, they've done a really good job of saving and putting money into the retirement account. They're so used to managing that it's difficult for them to give themselves to permission and say, oh, okay, I'm there. That's what this is for. I can now turn this on, right? And it's kind of the same way, separate from the dollar signs and the money, with their life, right? It's kind of like giving yourself permission to do these things that we kind of picture as this goal out in retirement. It's super important for people to, the earlier the better, to start having these conversations, because you can actually, kind of give yourself permission to do the things that you would do in retirement early before you start losing mobility. I always tell people to front load any, we've all got these visions of traveling, and people will get the RV and go across the country and all that stuff. That's fantastic. But I encourage people to do it during either the beginning of retirement or even prior to retirement, if they can whittle it in, because at some point you physically stop being able to do those kinds of things as much as you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think of, like, people think about like their paradise. Paradise is sitting on the beach drinking mojitos. But I mean, really, you can only do that for like a day or two before you're going to get you're baking in the sun. You're going to be drunk the whole time. That's not paradise. That's not at all what you want. You're talking about sitting in the recliner just waiting to die. That's the same kind of thing. So you have to be careful about how you do that. But you're right too, because you have to take into account the physicality of it. Like, your body's going to be at a certain point when you get there, and you're going to be okay for the first little bit of it. But as you start to move further down, you have to structure your days and your time spent a little bit differently, because you're not going to be capable of doing the things that you did earlier on. And that's got to be a tough lesson to learn as you go through it.
Absolutely. I mean, you probably heard other retirement. This is not a Chris concept. This is a concept that's out there. So you've probably heard other retirement advisors talk in this way, but there's the go-go years, the slow go, and the no-go, right? And so that has to do with, the beginning of retirement. There's a window of time where you're doing all of these things where you're mobile. And then there's a slow go where you're still mobile, but it's harder. You gotta kind of take it slow. Some things might lead to injury, right? So, and then there's the no-go, and that's at the end of the life cycle or life expectancy. So having that as a way to kind of frame when you spend down your retirement assets, it's one way, and it's actually pretty beneficial to look at it that way as far as your personal goals. If you have those things like traveling or anything that's on those, we hear the word bucket list a lot, right? I always say, do that stuff early. Try to do it as early as you can, because life happens, things come up. Yeah.
And I'm sure that as you're trying to communicate this with people, you have 50% of them that are going to see that and understand that and how that works. And the other half is going to say that, oh, I'm going to be fine the whole time. And it's going to be hard for them to hear that. It's hard for them to understand that's going to be them, where they're not going to be able to do as much as they can now.
Oh yeah, and I think that's everybody. I think you don't really understand mortality until you see it. So yeah, I think a lot of times people underestimate that. But these, what do they say? Death and taxes. These things are inevitable, right? So even the most type A, successful, energetic person, there are things and roadblocks that are common to the situation for an age group that are going to come up. And so, yeah, but it is difficult. So often people don't want to hear it. But yeah, there is no denying certain things come up, and it's like, okay, well, now we've got some tools to deal with them. So
yeah. Now, time management and productivity are crucial, especially for those pre-retirees. What tips or strategies do you recommend for individuals to make the most of their time in the pre-retirement phase?
yeah, anything that you can do to automate right now is a good thing, right? I was dealing with this yesterday with a client who one of their parents had dementia and had kind of an episode there where they weren't able to take their medication right on time, or they either doubled up or didn't take enough, right? And so this is one of these things that we see for retirees coming up, and there's a device that you can actually get that times the prescription drugs to come out, and you as a fit. So how does it? Because that's an older age group than the question you asked, right? So think about the caregivers who are pre-retired, right? Who aren't quite retired yet, but they're stepping in and helping mom and dad out. The idea of being able to have an app on your phone where you can track whether mom and dad has taken their medication on time. The step before you actually bring in licensed nurses and having medical staff that you do get to a point where you have to have medical professionals come in, and that's a whole nother cost, right? So that's a form of automation that people hasn't thought about really, that can make life easier for somebody who's in a caregiving role, who's pre-retiree. They haven't, their goals are the kids and mom and dad, right? That sandwich generation that's kind of in between there. Anything else that you can do on automation is a huge thing. Putting your savings on set it and forget it. Often when we get started at our employer and we turn on the 401k or the 403b and they've got a match, it is probably, if I was to ask either one of you or anybody in the audience, what's the easiest investment idea that you ever did that was that's usually it. It's anything that you can set on automatic that a lot of times people forget. And then you look back and you're like, wow, I saved that much money and I got a match in it, right? So the idea of automation for time, when it comes to time management, is a great thing. It just makes your life harder. A financial advisor, that's kind of what you're doing. You're delegating some of the financial piece, right? So you're automating something that you don't find enjoyment in. I get up at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm watching the market. So that's what a good advisor does. But anything else falls into that category. Anything in your life that you don't find, you don't have a passion about, being able to find ways to automate it is a good thing. And we're at a crazy time with technology where this is just becoming easier and easier for us.
Yeah, and I can imagine. So I have a couple friends who have older parents, and he's the one in particular has a app on his phone where he can see where mom is driving to and when she comes home, if the doors are open and all those things, just so that he can keep an eye on that, because that's important. You're talking about the medicine, being able to know that mom is taking her medicine. I can only imagine, you're talking about technology, I can only imagine in the next 5 years what the technology is going to do for that, because it seems like almost everybody has some sort of interaction with their parents going through this information, this type of stage in their life. And so because everybody is going through it, the technology is going to be there, the innovations are going to be there, because that's something that's important, and they're going to likely spend more or develop more for their parents who are going through these situations than they would for their customers who are trying to build or do whatever else, because it's not as meaningful to them. So I can only imagine, again, the next 5 years, the innovations that are going to happen in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So just embracing that, when I hear time management, I think about calendar, and we all, a lot of us live and die by our calendar, right? So that's kind of time management 101. So to-do list and having stuff on your calendar. But then the next kind of step there is the automation part and really embracing it. I work with people 55 and up, and I'm 50 now, but I started 20 years ago. So that age group, there was digital literacy issues there. The idea that, oh, can we do this remotely? Can we have conversations through Zoom or GoToMeetings, right? That idea after the pandemic, where people were encouraged to visit their doctors on screen, right? They weren't even kind of allowed into the doctor's office at one point. That is kind of I would say accelerated the idea of don't give up on the older generation when it comes to digital literacy. My grandmother is 96 and she's on Facebook, right? So I think we just had kind of a shot in the arm and a kind of an accelerator when it comes to people being open to the idea of communicating digitally. And with that, all of the automation stuff, embrace it. Yes, there's going to be some kinks, right? There's going to be some things we have to work out, bugs and that sort of thing. But anything, just looking over the next 5 years, as you said, I think it's just going to get better and better on that side.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, balancing financial health with overall well-being in retirement years is a delicate task. How do you approach this holistic perspective in your practice?
Yeah. So some advisors, if you walk into their office and you say, hey, I've got, $500,000 I want to invest with you. Can you invest it? They're going to right away say, yep, sign me, yes, sign me up. Let me help you with your money. Right. I am the other side of that. If somebody doesn't want to do a holistic, full financial plan with me, I won't do business with them. It's kind of like a doctor. I believe that other advisors who are willing to just give advice willy-nilly without looking at every aspect of their financial situation could actually do more harm than good. And so the idea of what you mentioned earlier, holistic financial planning, really looking at all of the different arms. Investments is one big piece of it, but so is estate planning. So is elderly care. So is tax planning. All of that, if you make certain decisions in one area, can ripple and affect in other areas. It can be something as simple as going out and buying the S&P 500, and that is comprised of a certain amount of tech stocks. But then you go over here and you have an overlap because you're holding those stocks individually. That's why whether you work with one advisor or multiple advisors, generally, I always recommend that people pick somebody that they like and stick with it, right? A lot of the higher net worth people like to kind of shop and use multiple advisors, but you're kind of doing yourself a disservice because they're not able to see what's going on over here when they're making investment decisions for you. So it's really, it's a big trust thing, right? So other than you, this is going to be somebody that's going to be like the third, between you and your spouse, this will be the third person in the world that knows your finances as good or better than you do, right? So I always encourage people to ask for help when it comes to that. That is a hard thing for human beings to do, though.
Well, and I can tell you, it's refreshing to know that you don't just take everybody on. It's nice to know that there's people, out there working in the field that you're in that are holding people and they have principles, and you have to allow yourself to fit into allow the clients rather to be able to fit into all of those principles in order for you guys to have that relationship together, because it's not just one-sided where they're working with you, but you are also working with them, and often that side of it gets lost in translation.
100%. I'll just piggyback on that and say, yes, there are a lot of bad financial advisors out there. They're giving the top 5% of the industry a bad name. I'm here in Houston. I think of Enron. I think of Bernie Madoff. I think of all of the stuff that people have this bad idea for a good reason, right? Those are crazy things that happen that, you're trusting people with your money, and that's not what those people signed up for when they put their pension money in Enron, right? So advisors who are ethical, who put the client first, it's really our responsibility to go out there and do a better job than these other people, right? Yes. Let people know that this is a thing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we talked a little bit about your podcast, Money Matters. Can you tell us a little bit about that show?
Yeah, money matters. It's an exciting thing to do. A lot of podcasts, you hear that number after 2 years or after 10 episodes, people have pod fade and then they go away, right? Money matters. We actually started out as a terrestrial radio based show here in Houston on KPFT 90.1. And it was live every Friday morning. And there was this byproduct of the show that was an MP3. And somebody told me, "Hey, you need to you need to actually put that out as a podcast." Fast forward, we got more listeners from the podcast than we got locally here in Houston. I go into Lipson and I look at the heat map and I'm like, hey, there's people in Israel listening to the show. Wow, that's crazy. That's the cool thing about podcasting is you can actually see where people are engaging you and listening to you. And, even now the shift between we didn't even have a YouTube channel prior to the pandemic. And then when everybody went remote and started recording and we didn't go for, we were no longer recording live from the radio station. This was from a room in my house via GoToMeeting or Zoom or what have you, right? The YouTube channel was kind of a byproduct. And so we were like, oh, well, yeah, we should post that, right? It wasn't fancy. After 10 years going back and doing this, the YouTube channel's only been around for a couple of years. The reason I'm bringing this up as a podcaster, the algorithm of what the show has only been, looking at the last 2 years. So interestingly enough, I'm having to go back and kind of retrain like, hey, this isn't a variety show. This is a retirement show. This is a financial literacy show. And that's kind of what Money Matters started as. So I'm actually kind of going back and doing shorts and that kind of thing to get the algorithm correct there. But that's a whole new avenue. It's interesting. We started out as a show that the whole idea was to have financial literacy conversations with everyday regular people. The idea of CNBC talking heads, people smarter than us and shooting over our head. We wanted to be the exact opposite of that. And so that's how the show started, very conversational. But over the last 10 years, we've had, New York Times bestselling authors and guests that just I never would have imagined we would have on the show. And so it's been a journey and just something that's real. I'm still passionate about it. Still love it till today. I've got more interviews after this. We're on the other side of the mic and just super excited about it every day.
So your show, you do a mix of guests and solo episodes?
I want to say over the last 10 years, I've maybe done 2 solo episodes. And those have really just been, I kind of done an end of year report. So at the end of the year, I'll kind of put together some of the 3 biggest topics that happened for the prior year. But mostly it's interview based. So it's usually just one-on-one. Occasionally I'll have a panel, maybe 3 or 4 people on there. But that's the focus. It's 30 minutes long and kind of stuck to that format. And I'm a creature of habits. So that one format, I've done that and just same way the whole time. And it's still each time people are interesting. It's everybody you talk to is different story. It's fascinating.
Now, do you, so after you book somebody as a guest, how much back information do you gather for them before you sit down and have that conversation?
Yeah, so this is my personal belief on guests for your podcast. Not a lot of people outsource this whole process, right? So they'll have companies that work for them that line it up, that do all of that work. I am very much the 90s do-it-yourself guy. I mix the show down. I put the show out myself. This is all I've got my. This is the biggest thing that I found. My little Stream Deck here, where I've got my editor and all of that. But generally, ask me the question one more time. I'm sorry.
So after you book somebody as a guest, what type of how much time do you spend, back checking and finding that information for them before you sit down?
Yeah, thank you. So this is my responsibility as the host to do the research about the person before they sit in front of me. Not a lot of podcasters have this belief. In fact, I've got 4. I've got 2 as a guest and 2 as a host today. So the idea that people won't really make it onto my show unless I've done the research up front that I feel like that's my responsibility, right? So I also, after doing this, is interesting from doing it as a guest standpoint, because I've had people that like are, hey, you can be on the podcast, but I want to do an interview with you before the podcast so that I can trust you to be a good guest and that you're media savvy, right? I never do this with my guests, but the reason I don't do this is because I literally will research that person before having them on the show. So it's all with intention. And I'll put together a list of like 10 questions for them, which you guys did as well for me. That helps me as a guest prepare and do the best job I can for listeners. I also do that. And I feel like that's going to be the best show. You know, you're not trying to play stump the professor, right? Or throw them hard balls or anything like that. So that's my process. And by the time they're sitting in front of me and I'm interviewing, I've already looked at, you know, their history. I don't have to answer that question. Are they media savvy? Because I know before they make it onto the show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we've done the show now. What did we start last year in January? No, 2 years ago in January. This one was last year. So yeah, this last January this year. So a year in 6 months, give or take, this show. And then we had another show that we did before that. And then I have a show that I do every day. The other show that we did before that was just me and him. It was no guest. We might have had one guest, our boss. But this one we do a mix of guests and solo episode. I get both of us by whatever. The interesting thing is being on this side of the microphone as the host. I try to give the guest as much information about the show as I possibly can and do the research for them, put the questions together, try to associate the questions with what they're interested in and what I'm interested in, and then do the show in such a way that facilitates that. I have now been on the other side as being a guest a handful of times, and it has not necessarily been that way all the time. There's been some standouts that are really good, but most of the time we'll have that sit down like you talked about, but you know, that connect call is what a lot of people they call that, and they don't know anything about me. I send them the information because they asked for it, and I send them the information, and here's the information about me. Here's all my links, all the stuff I'm doing, and then we sit down and they ask me all of that stuff, and then at the end of one of them in particular, I got asked, will you send me the links in the bio and all that? I'm like, well, I just actually sent that over to you before we had this meeting. Oh yeah, it might be in my system somewhere. I'll have to it's been really interesting. And also I have now, this has happened three times where somebody has reached out for me to be a guest on their show. We sit down, we do that connect call. And during that connect call, they try to sell me, not on to be a guest on their show, but they're selling me whatever program it is that they're doing. And then the show never even ends up happening.
Right. I've had that same experience. So you know, I want to say I'm on like a number 24 today of this. I'm sure my goal is 30 guest spots by October, right? That would give me a whole year that I've been on this tour. But I've had that same experience where I've had people, you're in the middle of that pre-interview screening, and then they're trying to charge you for the service of being on their podcast. And it's just kind of crazy because I've been doing this for 10 years. And the other one that I guess if we're talking smack about this is okay. So the other one is I've had somebody just start the pre-screen with, now who are you? And as if I was like, you don't, you know, why did you put this call together and have me on this if you haven't taken the time to do the research or know who I am? So I maybe they're just trying to put you on the spot so that they can see how you react or something like that. But I was like, really? Like
the question that I've gotten a couple times now recently, and it's I don't know, whatever. They say, how can I best help you? What do you mean? How can you best help me? But let me be a guest on your show. You reached out to me to be a guest on your show, but then now you're asking me how you can help me. No, let's just do the show, man. Let's just talk and have it on. I don't know.
It's a weird thing. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and so I'm totally bootstrap, you know, do it myself. This is it's a hobby in the sense that it's a pay, you know, it gives me credibility in the local community. It's done great things for my career over the last 20 years. But at the end of the day, there's not a paycheck associated with a podcast, right? Mm-hmm. So that's just the way it is. With that being said, I encourage everybody who would like to podcast to get in there. It's an amazing time for podcasting. But I'm skeptical of those people that their business model is around charging people for being guests on the show. That's kind of what in the radio days, payola, I think is what it was called. So kind of weird. Not my, cup of tea, but I know that there's entrepreneurs out there that's if you're kind of just getting your feet wet, and that's how you get started. I can see where that might be a thing. So, but maybe I should be less judgmental. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting for us on this side of things where, doing the show, just the two of us for a while. And then, someone reached out to us, they wanted to be on our show, and we said, oh, okay, sure, why not? And that started down this road of meeting people that are going to be in this podcasting realm. And then, from different walks of life and different jobs and different perspectives. And, for whatever the podcast is and how grateful we are to have this podcast, personally, it's like a weekly education for me. I come here and I sit down and I talk to people like you. I talk to other people who are coaches and business entrepreneurs and all these people I never would have had contact with outside of this podcast. And so, I love doing the podcast. I love being a part of the process and everything that it does, being the show. But at the end of the day, I would come here if the podcast didn't exist, but I had the chance to sit down with people like you every single week and learn from them. So, show aside, just being able to meet all these different people and learn from them is so beneficial. And the fact that we get to share that with other people through the podcast is just that extra added benefit to me. So, it's cool to hear you talk about it. And it seems like we all kind of approach the show and the podcast realm with kind of the same mindset, even though we're talking about two different things typically. It's just great to hear the same mindset that we kind of all have for it.
100%, Chris. I love what you just said there. I totally agree. Over the last 10 years, I'm one of these people that if I read a book and I want to get a little bit more into the brain of the author, I'll invite the author onto the show. And I've looked at the podcast as a separate university than college, right? A separate university along the way. I've learned so much from my guest over the years. It's amazing. It's just, that's one of the benefits of podcasting that is very hard to put into words. So I love that you said that.
Yeah. And we're talking about paying. We don't do this. We couldn't do this. We couldn't facilitate this. But if a payment is going to happen from a guest on a show, the show should be paying the guest to be a guest on the show, not the other way around.
I love that. I kind of agree with that. But we do this out of the the love of our heart, of the passion of podcasting. So I agree. That's right.
Now, from the podcast, have you been able to facilitate any seminars or talks where you can share the information that you're talking about with the podcast to other larger groups in person?
Yeah, absolutely. So I told you I wear more than one hat, right? So I've got my financial planning practice. I've got the podcast, another what I call side hustle here, which side hustles are good, is I do financial literacy classes. So these are worksite education where I'll go out and I'll do educational seminars around finance for companies. It's usually the health insurance that wants to have a financial wellness piece, and they'll hire me to go in and talk to the employees. I often stuff that I've done on the radio show or the podcast has overlapped with those talks. It's just all of it kind of goes together. And whether it's here locally where I'm live or if it's nationally where we're just doing webinars, bringing that in, it brings credibility. If you come into my office, I have. I was lucky enough to interview the mayor of our city 10 years ago. And so I have this proudly displayed in the office. There's no, dollar equivalent of having that opportunity. And that bubbled up within the first 10 episodes of the show. So it's just crazy and amazing where the podcast will take you.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, the different avenues, like you're talking about, the different avenues, just to meet and talk with those people, and then where that connection goes afterwards has been really fascinating.
Yeah, and this, Anise Parker, that was our mayor at the time. We were talking about a LIBOR scandal where Houston was part of a few people in a class action lawsuit against the LIBOR index. Crazy kind of topic. Before the show happened, it turns out that she used to own a bookstore here in Houston. And when I was in college, I managed a bookstore, and she was a science fiction fan. So we ended up talking about science fiction and just books and running a bookstore and stuff. Completely never made it into the show, but just the kind of fascinating thing where she ended up inviting me every Christmas. The mayor would have a press party where they would have the local media come to her house. Not all the mayors do it, but she did, and that was all through just the little podcast that I started locally, right? Or I guess at the time it was a live radio show. So I took a little voice recorder out there and used that to interview her. But yeah, all of the, it's very, strange where all of these connections go. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, speaking of connections, you worked with Fortune 500 companies, building financial services. How has this experience shaped your perspective as far as financial planning for individuals go?
Yeah. So when I worked at UBS and Merrill Lynch, the big major wirehouses that people know about, it looks good for credibility because they look at this. Oh, you work for a top 500 company. But what it taught me was what not to do. When it comes to investment or financial planning. In fact, I'm a very small advisor. I've got a small office here in Bel Air. I've got an assistant that works remotely, and a lot of times when I have clients, I'll kind of make fun of those advisors, and don't hold me to it. But typically, the successful advisor there might have a corner office. You walk in, and it's kind of like an attorney's office, and there's maple and mahogany everywhere, right? But at the end of the day, what is that? That guy's usually out golfing on the weekends. You're probably talking to the assistant only. So as an individual, kind of a smaller advisor, I try to juxtapose myself against those larger companies. But that is after having worked for those companies and kind of seeing also worked for Chase. That's the other one. If we're talking bad about companies here, I can say that. I think it's okay to throw that out there. Chase, after having been a personal banker there for years, when I went into business, I'm never going to open my bank account at Chase just because I saw kind of the crazy stuff that went on in the background. So I opened an account at Washington Mutual, which got bought up by Chase and got gobbled. And so all roads lead to Chase. Those are the large companies that eventually will, overtake some of those smaller ones there. But with that being said, I've when I get a client that's coming from like a wirehouse, often it's because when they start talking about things like Social Security or pension, they ask their advisor and their eyes start glazing up. They're like, yeah, I know about Social Security, but they don't really go into the weeds and that sort of stuff. So my, years as being independent kind of tried to set myself apart from those guys for sure.
Well, I can imagine being, in the corporate world and knowing what that's like, and then finding out that that's not how you want to do it. And then you get to design your own work after that, after knowing what not to do and what to do and how to best help your clients is crucial. And I'm sure you've had some people that have, some clients that have worked with those big companies, maybe have transferred over to working with you and can see the difference in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those crazy advisors that remember the days of house calls where you had your doctor's cell phone number and that sort of thing. I have a small book of business. It's very large. I've managed millions of dollars of retirement assets, but it's with intent and purpose. And so because we keep it's a family office, we keep it down to a specific number of families. We're able to do what we say without a service bottleneck, right? Some of those larger producers at the wirehouse, they've got 2,400 clients, and they're just not able to do what they say there. So, but that's only manageable on a small scale. I would make the argument that if you go into a place and you sit down with a team and they've got like 5 or 6 people that need to be on a committee to make your investment decisions for you, sometimes there's too many cooks in the kitchen. You're paying for that somewhere, and you literally don't need all that. So.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. So now, Chris, I got to tell you, thank you. Thank you for sharing the wealth of information that you have. And as we are wrapping up here, what advice do you have for listeners who might be in that pre-retirement phase, looking to optimize their financial and overall well-being in order to secure that future for them?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the savings, right? And I know there's, oh, really savings? That's nothing groundbreaking. What are you telling me here? Well, it's the idea that if you are in that pre-retirement, so we're saying 50 and up, right? You're kind of that end zone where you got to get really aggressive. You may want to take advantage of the catch-up provisions in your IRAs to really bulk up and to save more than you were able to save when you were younger than 50, right? But it's kind of a make it or break it. You've either done it at that stage or it's going to get more difficult. So I would encourage people to get aggressive on savings. 10% is a number that you hear out there. You should be saving at least 10% of every paycheck that you have coming in. Because I've seen where this can go wrong, I tend to tell people, hey, if you're able to do somewhere between 10 to 20%, I've never had a client come back to me and say, oh, I saved too much. We've got too much money put aside. It's always the opposite, right? So you can't really go wrong with saving too much money. So I'd encourage people, to be aggressive and to kind of put it out of sight, out of mind, so that you're not having those issues when it gets time to retire. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And if our listeners wanted to learn more about you, where could they go to do that?
Yeah, so there's two websites that they can go to. The one for my financial planning practice is www.houstonfirstfinancialgroup.com. And then for the podcast, which I always encourage people to go there, it's www.moneymatterspodcast.com.
Very good. And I'll be sure to leave the links to those in the show notes. And listeners, stay tuned for more empowering episodes. Until next time.